They say love makes you do crazy things, and I guess that night I found out exactly how true that was. It was our engagement dinner, a cozy affair with just a few friends and family. Candlelight flickered across the table, casting a warm glow that matched the buzz from the wine. Mark was charming, as always, laughing easily, his hand wrapped around mine. I felt wrapped in a cocoon of happiness, trusting and content. Towards the end of the evening, as desserts arrived, Mark's demeanor shifted slightly. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping into an intimate whisper meant just for me. You know, we don't need a prenup, right? His question hung in the air, a soft yet insistent intrusion into the warmth of the night. I felt a slight tremor of surprise ripple through me. Mark continued, eyes holding mine with earnest sincerity. He spoke of soulmates and trust, of building a life together without barriers. He painted a picture of a union so profound that preparing for potential failure seemed, to him, a betrayal of that ideal. Soulmates don't need legal contracts, do they? He asked, his tone gentle, persuasive. In the moment, I was caught off guard. A part of me was flattered, touched by his apparent conviction in the strength of our love. But there was another part, a quieter voice that whispered caution. My family had always been pragmatic, instilling in me the importance of protecting oneself, of not confusing romance with naivety. But that evening, under the spell of love, I felt myself wavering. I noticed my mother watching us from across the table, her expression unreadable. She had always been wary, perhaps a little too protective, but always with my best interests at heart. I could almost predict the conversation that would follow her raised eyebrows and discreet, worried nod. But in that moment, I pushed her silent warnings aside. Mark was mine, and I was his. What could go wrong? As we left the restaurant, arm in arm, the city lights twinkling around us, I pondered his request. He seemed so sure, so certain that love alone would be enough to carry us through any storm. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust blindly, to leap without looking, but doubt lingered at the edges of my mind like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. In our quiet walk back, with the city's hum weaving through our conversation, Mark framed it as a test of sorts, proof of my love and commitment. Just words, but they pressed heavily against my heart. I could sense he expected an answer, and soon, in his eyes, the gleam of anticipation mingled with something I couldn't quite pinpoint. Was it just the excitement of our future, or something more calculated? Back home, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of his request settle over me like a shadow. The silence of the room amplified my thoughts, and I replayed his words over and over. I loved Mark, truly, but was love alone enough to forgo safeguarding my future? The question nagged at me, refusing to be silenced. The next morning, with daylight streaming through the curtains, the world felt different, somehow clearer. Mark moved about the kitchen, humming cheerfully, making coffee as if nothing had shifted. But for me, the previous night's conversation lingered, unresolved. As we sat down to breakfast, I looked at him, really looked, hoping to find some sign, a clue as to his true motivations. Perhaps I was overthinking, letting seeds of doubt cloud my judgment. But as we exchanged morning pleasantries and laughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this decision, whatever it might eventually be, would alter the course of our lives irrevocably. With a gentle resolve, I decided to take my time, to weigh my options carefully. Love may be blind, but I refused to let it blindfold me, and as I smiled at Mark across the table, I felt a quiet determination grow within me. Whatever path I chose, it would be one that let me sleep peacefully at night, knowing I had been true to myself. Weeks passed in a blur of newlywed bliss and adjustment. Mark and I settled into a rhythm, our days filled with laughter and shared dreams. I wanted to believe that everything was just as it should be, that my doubts were nothing more than fleeting shadows. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed, they returned, those persistent whispers of unease. One afternoon, I returned home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet, and Mark's car was absent from the driveway. I presumed he'd gone out for errands, but something compelled me to take a look in his study. It was a room I rarely entered, respecting it as his personal space. As I stepped inside, I noticed a neat stack of papers on his desk. Curiosity nudged me forward, an inexplicable urge pushing aside my reservations. The first page caught my eye, a title across the top in bold letters, Asset Allocation Plan. My heart began to thud loudly in my chest as I gingerly picked it up. The document outlined a strategy to merge and manage our finances, but the distribution seemed heavily skewed in favor of Mark. Line by line, my eyes skimmed across terms and clauses, each one more alarming than the last. He had plans to gain control over almost everything we owned jointly, weaving a web of legal jargon likely designed to confuse or coerce. I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me: disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. There it was, in black and white, the blueprint of his intentions he'd never shared with me, intentions that spoke of anything but the trust and partnership of marriage. The sound of the front door opening startled me out of my reverie. I hurriedly replaced the documents, suppressing the urge to fling them across the room. Mark's footsteps approached, his voice calling out a cheerful greeting. "Hey, darling, are you home?" In a veneer of composure, I stepped out to greet him, my heart pounding like a distant drum. "Yes, I got off early," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray the turmoil within. He kissed me lightly on the cheek, none the wiser of my discovery. Our routine continued as usual, but inside I felt tension winding tighter with each passing moment. Days turned into a careful dance around what I now knew, every interaction shaded by the knowledge of his plans. I wanted to confront him immediately, demand answers, but something held me back, the uncertainty of how deep his deception ran. Instead, I observed him closely, looking for any signs that might validate or refute what I'd read. Each evening, I watched him over dinner, his easy demeanor, the glint in his eyes that I once found charming now seemed calculating. Had I been so easily deceived, or had I chosen to ignore the signs all along? The thought haunted me as I lay awake at night, the silence amplifying my racing thoughts. One morning, as he stepped into the shower, I found myself back in his study, emboldened by the need to know more. I sifted through drawers and files, unearthing more documents that confirmed my fears. His intent was unmistakable, his manipulation carefully orchestrated. The betrayal was a thorn lodged deep within, festering with every reminder of his duplicity. Yet I knew I couldn't simply react. Any confrontation without preparation could leave me vulnerable, unprotected. I needed a plan, a way to safeguard my interests, and perhaps uncover just how far he was willing to go. With a determination forged in the fires of betrayal, I decided to seek advice from an old friend who was a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate the intricate maze Mark seemed intent on building around me. In the days that followed, I would maintain the facade of ignorance, all while quietly preparing for the battle I never anticipated fighting. Mark continued, oblivious, his affection seemingly genuine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all an act, a meticulously crafted performance. My resolve solidified with each passing day, knowing that the time would come when I would have the answers I needed. And when that time came, I intended to be ready, no longer the passive participant in whatever game he was playing. The stakes were high, but I felt a quiet strength building within. Mark might have set the stage, but I was determined to rewrite the ending. I placed the incriminating documents back exactly as I found them, my fingers trembling slightly from the rush of adrenaline. There was something about seeing it all in black and white that made the betrayal seem more real, more suffocating. I couldn't confront Mark, not yet, not without a plan. So I took a deep breath, locked away my hurt, and decided to confide in someone I trusted completely. Anna, an old friend from college, was a lawyer specializing in family law. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I knew she was the one person I could count on for discreet advice. That afternoon, I texted her, suggesting we meet for coffee. I kept my tone light, masking the urgency and turmoil brewing within me. When we met at our favorite cafe, the familiar aroma of freshly ground beans offered a momentary comfort. Anna hugged me warmly, her eye crinkling in concern as she noticed my unease. We settled into a booth, the clatter of cups and quiet chatter around us providing a cocoon of anonymity. "Anna, I need your help," I said, my voice barely containing the edge of desperation. She nodded, waiting patiently for me to continue. I recounted the events that had unfolded, how Mark had tricked me into skipping the prenup, and the devastating discovery of his hidden plans. Each word felt like a weight lifting, revealing the depth of the treachery. Anna's expression shifted from concern to steely determination. "He's violating your trust and your financial security," she said, the authority in her voice offering a glimmer of hope. "We need to gather as much evidence as possible without alerting him." We spent the next hour devising a strategy. Anna advised me to discreetly document everything: emails, text messages, any financial records Mark might have left accessible. Her instructions were clear: do nothing that might tip him off and keep the facade of normalcy intact. As we parted ways, Anna promised to run some legal checks in the background. Her encouragement left me with a newfound sense of resolve. I knew I wasn't alone in this fight, and that knowledge was both a comfort and a catalyst for my next steps. Back at home, I slipped into the role of the oblivious wife with practiced ease. Mark greeted me with his usual smile, but now all I saw were cracks in his mask. I played my part, sharing mundane stories from my day, while inside, a storm churned. The following days turned into a delicate dance. I quietly gathered every piece of evidence possible, filing them away in a hidden folder on my laptop. Each discovery made my resolve stronger, my heart hardened against the man I once vowed to love. Mark continued his charade, blissfully unaware of my growing arsenal. I saw through his smiles, his gentle caresses, each gesture now laced with deceit. He had no idea his every move was being calmly documented, no clue that I was laying the groundwork for a battle that would eventually destroy his plans. Despite the betrayal, I refused to let bitterness consume me. Instead, I focused on the future, on securing a life untethered from his manipulation. Each day brought me closer to the moment when I could finally expose the truth, when all his fabrications would come crashing down. Anna's updates were steady and encouraging, a lifeline in the dark sea of deceit I was navigating. She discovered some financial anomalies in Mark's accounts, threads we could eventually pull at to unravel his entire scheme. Each revelation was like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, painting a clear picture of the man Mark truly was, a man willing to betray for greed. I kept my emotions carefully, refusing to give him any reason to suspect the storm brewing behind my placid facade. Mark remained the actor in this twisted play, but I was the one rewriting the lines, preparing for the perfect moment to bring down the curtain on his deceit. In those moments of quiet reflection, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. The betrayal had been a crucible, forging a resolve that ran deeper than any vow exchanged on our wedding day. I was determined to reclaim my life, my dignity, and, most importantly, my freedom from the man who had thought he could chain me with false promises. The stakes were high, but so was my determination. As I sat alone replaying the events of the past few weeks, I realized I was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. With Anna's guidance and the evidence I amassed, I knew the scales would eventually tip in my favor. Mark might have started this game of deceit, but he had underestimated me. I was not merely the pawn he imagined. I was the queen on this chessboard, and soon I would make my decisive move, sealing his fate with the very chains of betrayal he had forged himself. The air was thick with celebration and laughter at our anniversary party, but underneath the surface, I felt like an outsider in my own life. My friends and family were scattered around the room, clinking glasses and exchanging stories, unaware of the undercurrents of deceit flowing beneath this polished veneer. I played my part well, smiling and nodding at the right moments, concealing the storm within me. It was exhausting, this charade, but necessary. Mark moved through the crowd with ease, the perfect host, but to me, he was just an elaborate facade. I slipped away from the main room, needing a moment to catch my breath, and ended up in the hallway where voices drifted from the study down the corridor. I hesitated at first, the murmur of conversation indistinct, but something pulled me closer. As I got nearer, the words became clear, each one piercing through my skin like tiny needles. Mark was inside with his friend Alan, a man who had always seemed more shadow than person, Mark's occasional confidant, never truly present when it mattered. "She's completely oblivious," Mark was saying, his voice dripping with confidence. I felt my heart tighten in my chest, my ears straining to catch every word. "Once I have full control, we can move forward without a hitch." That single sentence confirmed it all, the manipulation, the deceit. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms as I stood hidden just beyond the threshold, my breath steadied to avoid giving myself away. Alan laughed, a sound that was both grating and "she has no idea, you really have played this beautifully." Mark chuckled in response, a self-satisfied tone accompanying his words. "Please, she's never been any match for me. This time next year, I'll be the one calling the shots, and she'll be none the wiser until it's too late." Each declaration hit me like a wave, crashing and relentless. I fought the urge to storm in and confront him, the anger simmering beneath my skin. But Anna's advice echoed in my mind, reminding me to hold back, to let the unraveling play out on my terms. I stood there, my heart a pounding drumbeat of betrayal, my resolve hardening with each passing second. The casual manner in which Mark dismissed me, as though I were nothing more than a pawn in his grand scheme, was infuriating. Yet, somewhere within the hurt, a quiet strength surfaced, reminding me that I was no victim. I had known the risks, seen the shadows lurking beneath his charm, and still I had the foresight to prepare. Their voices recessed into murmurs, the contentment of their scheming thick in the air. I slipped away, my presence undetected, and returned to the party. The act resumed, a smile, a toast, a wave to a distant friend, but inside I was a fortress of steely determination. Later, as the guests began to leave, I caught Mark's eye across the room. He was all smiles and ease, none the wiser to the fact that I had heard everything. I nodded back, a gesture that concealed the tempest brewing beneath the surface. He thought he was the only one writing this narrative, but our story was about to take a turn he never anticipated. As the last guest departed, Mark approached me, still wearing that grin. "Great party, wasn't it, darling?" he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Yes," I replied, my voice unwavering. Everything was just as it should be. I met his gaze, allowing none of the emotions roiling inside me to reach the surface. He seemed pleased, perhaps seeing only what he wanted to see, a compliant partner blind to his machinations. But beneath the surface, I was a torrent, waiting for the right moment to rise. In the days that followed, I kept up the performance, ensuring Mark believed his narrative, all the while preparing for the curtain to fall on his deceit. With every quiet interaction, each carefully conversation, I built the bridge to my eventual liberation. Mark, ever the orchestrator, failed to see the threads I was weaving, threads that would soon pull the foundation from beneath his carefully constructed world. As I lay in bed that night, his form a silent silhouette beside me, I knew that the moment I had overheard him, a line had been drawn. The betrayal had solidified my resolve, and with each passing day, I grew more certain of the outcome. The storm I was crafting would soon break, and Mark would find himself on the wrong side of the destruction he had so arrogantly set in motion. The day after the anniversary party, I sat in the sunlit office of Anna, my lawyer and confidante. The room was lined with shelves of legal tomes and a large oak desk that bore witness to countless battles won and lost. Anna's demeanor was reassuring as she sifted through the marriage documents I had brought. I watched her eyes narrow slightly as she studied the pages, her fingers tracing a particular paragraph. "You're not going to believe this," she said, looking up with a sense of triumph that suddenly shifted the atmosphere in the room. "Your grandmother was a shrewd woman. She included a clause when drafting these documents, a safeguard." My heart quickened. "A safeguard?" Anna nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, an irrevocable trust that protects your inheritance in the event of misfortune." She gave a slight, as she pronounced the word misfortune, as if acknowledging the polite facade we both knew was unnecessary. I leaned back, a wave of washing over me. The trust meant that Mark's scheming would be futile against this legal wall my grandmother had constructed. The betrayal stung less with this newfound shield, and I felt a renewed strength coursing through me. Anna continued. "The trust was designed to be activated only under circumstances where your financial security is threatened. It's clear that your grandmother anticipated potential risks and wanted to ensure you were protected." I sat there, absorbing the weight of my grandmother's foresight. She must have sensed something about Mark, or perhaps it was just a measure against future uncertainties. Either way, it felt as though she was reaching out from the past to hold my hand through this turbulent time. I straightened up, determination setting my course. This clause was a tool I would wield when Mark least expected it. Anna and I discussed our next steps, carefully plotting a path that would allow him to walk into his own snare, unaware of the trap laid by his own arrogance. As we wrapped up our meeting, Anna's parting words echoed in my mind. "Let him make the first move. We'll be ready." I returned home that evening, Mark greeting me with his usual charm. "Busy day, love? You seem distracted." "Just tying up some loose ends," I replied, maintaining my facade. His smile never wavered, still convinced of his control. Days passed in a careful dance of normalcy, each moment a step closer to the boiling point. I attended to our daily lives with a calm, while beneath the surface, plans were set in motion. Mark's confidence bordered on the whenever he spoke about our finances, never suspecting the fortress I now knew protected me. One evening, as we sat on the patio, the sky painted with the fading glow of sunset, Mark turned to me with his certainty. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we consolidate some of our accounts, streamline our assets." My pulse quickened, but my response was measured. "That sounds like an idea worth discussing." Watching him lean back with satisfaction, I knew he was underestimating me, mistaking patience for ignorance. Yet, it was this underestimation that would be his. He was weaving his own web, and I was content to let him. The days turned to weeks, and I followed Anna's advice, letting him initiate the change he so eagerly awaited. The irrevocable trust was a silent sentinel, keeping vigil over my inheritance. My grandmother's wisdom was my armor, her protective claws the sword I would wield. In the quiet moments when Mark was none the wiser, I felt a gratitude for the foresight that had been gifted to me. It wasn't just the inheritance, it was the knowledge that I was never truly alone in this struggle. With each passing day, I held onto this anchor, knowing that soon the balance of power would shift and Mark would face the consequences of his seat. The storm was gathering, and as each piece of the plan fell into place, I felt the tide turning in my favor. As I prepared for the inevitable confrontation, I knew the moment of reckoning was drawing near. Mark was about to learn the hard way that betrayal cuts both ways. Weeks passed like a slow, deliberate dance, each step taking us closer to the inevitable. Mark remained blissfully captivated by his own illusions of victory. I watched him go about life with casual, never suspecting the storm that was patiently brewing on the horizon. His confidence was almost, if not for the truth that lay buried beneath it. I kept my resolve hidden, masked beneath a facade of normalcy. One evening, as the golden hues of the day were swallowed by the encroaching night, Mark approached me. He began, "I've gone ahead and started some paperwork to consolidate everything. It's really for the best, you'll see." My heart at his presumption, but I held my expression steady. "All right, I trust you've thought it through." His smile was one of satisfaction, a man who believed he had successfully pulled the wool over someone's eyes. As I let the days slip by, I noticed the subtle shifts in Mark's demeanor, a certain edge to his words, as if every conversation was an unspoken reminder of the power he thought he wielded. Yet, I remained undeterred, my silence a calculated choice, allowing him to move his pieces on the board, unwittingly maneuvering himself into a corner. The moment he initiated the divorce proceedings, he seemed almost with anticipation, as if he was on the cusp of accomplishment. His ignorance was so it almost felt oppressive, his understanding of my actions limited to what his arrogance allowed him to see. He presented the paperwork to me one afternoon, his tone barely masking the triumph in his voice. "Once we get this sorted, everything will finally fall into place." I accepted the documents, my hands steady, despite the turmoil playing beneath my skin. "I'll have a look," I said, knowing full well he was handing me a weapon of his own making. My outward calm was a shield, impenetrable, leaving him none the wiser to the game being played. Throughout this ordeal, I couldn't help but reflect on the tapestry of our relationship. What began as a picture of companionship had unraveled into a battlefield of silent strategies. My heart, once tender and naively hopeful, had grown, a testament to the strength drawn from the women in my family. The very blood that coursed through my veins now fed my resolve, a legacy of fierce warriors in a different kind of war. As Mark prepared for what he believed would be his victory, I deeply, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was protected. The trust, my grandmother's final gift, shimmered in the corners of my consciousness, a silent guardian that stood unwavering. My inheritance, the tangible symbol of her love and foresight, would stand unscathed amidst the coming storm. Mark's hubris was his Achilles' heel, his inability to see beyond his own desires blinding him to the truth that lay ahead. There was a profound in watching him assemble the very chains that would bind him, thinking them to be his tools of liberation. This was the final act in a play he had scripted, unaware that the ending had been written long before he took his first step on this treacherous path. The clock ticked down to the day where all would be laid bare, and with each beat, my anticipation grew. I held tightly to the quiet power within me, my emotions, and walked each day like a woman with nothing to lose. In truth, I was a woman with everything to gain, a future untainted by betrayal and deception. The stage was set, and the curtains would soon rise on the final scene. Mark would learn the hard way that deceit, once uncovered, leaves no room for redemption. The day of reckoning was drawing near, and with it, an end to the charade we had been living. The day of the divorce settlement meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of calm determination and quiet anticipation. As I entered the room, Mark was already seated, his back straight, his confidence practically radiating. He wore a suit that exuded authority, the kind of armor one wears when expecting an easy victory. I couldn't help but notice the way he nodded at me, as if this was all but a mere formality. My lawyer Anna was by my side, her expression a mask of professionalism. I drew comfort from her presence, the quiet strength she exuded serving as a reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. We took our seats opposite Mark and his legal team, the table between us a silent battlefield. The discussions began, each side presenting their case. Mark's lawyer was all efficiency as he laid out their demands. I could hear the arrogance in his voice as he spoke of fair division, a term that seemed laughably skewed in their favor. Mark leaned back comfortably, watching the proceedings with an air of certainty. Nikesiafen Weshradi AR. Every detail of their financial requests was dissected, the numbers and terms a transactional mockery of what was once supposed to be a loving marriage. I listened with a demeanor, my heart steady as I waited for the right moment. Finally, the conversation steered towards my assets, and I saw a flicker of triumph in Mark's eyes. He likely thought the end game was in sight, his well-laid plans coming to fruition. Instead, this was the moment I'd been for. Anna leaned forward, her expression turning as she placed a folder on the table. Before we proceed with these claims, she began, hinting at what was to come, there's a matter we need to address regarding the inheritance. Mark's lawyer frowned, his brows drawing together in confusion. Inheritance? He echoed, the word tinged with incredulity. Anna nodded, her tone as she flipped open the folder to reveal the documents. My client's inheritance is protected by an irrevocable trust established before the marriage, she explained. Of these assets are legally untouchable. The room fell into a moment of silence, the air suddenly thick with tension. Mark's face shifted, his earlier confidence melting into disbelief. I watched as understanding dawned on him, his features with a mix of shock and anger. His lawyer attempted to rebut, but Anna was already a step ahead. The clause was inserted by the creator of the trust as a safeguard, she continued, and it predates any claims of marital rights to those funds. There's nothing in the divorce proceedings that can change the terms of the trust. Mark's composure cracked visibly. He sat forward as he addressed me directly. You set me up, he accused, the words a mixture of anger and betrayal. I met his gaze with a quiet steadiness. No, Mark, I replied, my voice, you underestimated me. The rest of the meeting progressed with a newfound tension. Mark's lawyer struggled to regroup, his earlier assurance in the face of undeniable legal truth. Mark sat silently, a storm of emotions shifting over his face even as he tried to retain his composure. By the end of the session, the terms were clear. The irrevocable trust had shifted the balance entirely, nullifying their financial ambitions. I could feel Mark's frustration, a palpable energy that crackled in the room's stillness. As the meeting adjourned, Mark lingered, his gaze piercing as he attempted to salvage some pride. You planned this all along, didn't you? He asked, his voice attempting to regain some ground. I met his eyes, sensing the battle beneath his calm exterior. I protected what was never yours to take, I said. His silence was answer enough, a grudging of defeat he couldn't voice. Walking out of that room, the weight of the past eased with every step. The truth had, its light cutting through the shadows of deceit and betrayal. And as the doors closed behind us, I knew that despite the turbulence, my future was mine once more, secure and untainted, just as my grandmother intended. The courtroom was almost eerily silent as the judge finalized the ruling. The air felt heavy with the weight of Mark's ambitions dissolving into nothing but a series of poorly laid plans. I sat there, my heart steady, knowing that justice had been served. As the struck, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The irrevocable trust was declared untouchable, my inheritance secured beyond any doubt. Mark's expression was a shifting tapestry of disbelief and fury, each emotion vying for dominance on his face. This can't be happening, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. The words hung in the air, unacknowledged by the room that had already moved on from his defunct schemes. His lawyer, visibly dismayed, offered no solace, knowing well that they had cornered themselves into an inescapable checkmate. I stood up, gathering my belongings with a sense of closure I hadn't anticipated. There was a satisfaction in knowing that my grandmother's foresight had shielded me from Mark's grasp. As I walked past him, he remained seated, hands clenched into fists of impotent rage, the charm he had so carefully cultivated now nothing more than a facade cracking at the edges. It's over, Mark, I said softly, stopping just long enough to let the reality sink in. His response was a mere whisper, bitterness lining his voice. You never loved me, he accused, a last, desperate attempt to regain some semblance of power. I met his gaze not with anger, but with acceptance of what we were, what we never were. Maybe not in the way you hoped, I replied, stepping away from the man who had tried to dismantle my world. The courthouse hallway was a long corridor of echoes, each step resonating with a newfound freedom. Anna joined me, her presence a comforting reminder of the support that had carried me through. She looked at me with a smile, her eyes reflecting the triumph of our shared efforts. You did it, she said, her voice a whisper of congratulations that needed no fanfare. We stepped outside, into the brisk air that felt like a tell. The sun was bright, its rays kissing my skin with a promise of brighter days ahead. As we walked to the car, I felt lighter, the burdens of deceit no longer tethered to my steps. Mark's influence, as potent as it had once seemed, was now reduced to nothing more than a bad memory, a tale of caution and deception that would fade into the annals of my past. Coffee? Anna suggested, her tone light, inviting me back into the normalcy of life untainted by courtrooms and legal battles. I nodded, grateful for her presence, for the support she had unwaveringly offered from day one. The future stretched out before me, a canvas untouched by the shadows of betrayal. And as we drove away from the courthouse, I knew that this chapter had ended as it was meant to, with truth prevailing, with love fortified by inheritance intact, just as my grandmother had always intended. In that moment, I realized the true victory wasn't just about the assets I'd protected, but the lessons I'd learned about trust, resilience, and the quiet courage that comes with standing firm against the storm. This was my story, my resolution, as solid and unyielding as the trust that had saved me.